"I want a child with you," the Japanese woman said to the shy black American soldier. August 14th, 1945. Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. The cattle truck lurched to a stop, and Keiko Tanaka pressed her face against the wooden slats, expecting to see the instruments of her execution. Through the gaps, she counted 12 American soldiers, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. None pointed at the prisoners. This confused her more than it comforted her. The journey from the naval battle off Okinawa to this remote American camp had taken 17 days. 17 days during which Keiko had prepared herself for torture, starvation, and death. The propaganda films she had watched in Tokyo before the war showed Americans as demons who would bayonet prisoners for sport. Her commanding officer had told the women in her unit to save the last bullet for themselves rather than face capture. But Keiko's pistol had jammed, and the American sailors had pulled her from the water before she could drown herself. Now, as the truck door opened, afternoon sunlight flooded the dark interior. Keiko shielded her eyes. A sergeant stepped forward, his face weathered but not cruel. He spoke in English, then a translator repeated his words in Japanese. "You will be processed. You will be given food and medical attention. No one will harm you." Keiko did not believe him. Japanese soldiers did not treat enemy prisoners with such courtesy. Why would Americans be any different? She climbed down from the truck, her legs weak from the journey. 23 other Japanese prisoners followed, mostly women who had served in communications and medical units. The Americans separated them by gender, but not roughly. When one elderly woman stumbled, a young American corporal steadied her by the elbow. The woman flinched as if struck, then stared at the soldier's hand on her arm with an expression Keiko recognized. It was the look of someone whose entire understanding of reality had just been questioned. The processing building was made of wood, not the concrete bunkers Keiko expected. Inside, American soldiers in clean uniforms sat behind desks with typewriters. The room smelled of coffee and cigarette smoke, ordinary smells that seemed wrong in what should have been a place of horror. Each prisoner was photographed, given a number, and asked questions through interpreters. Name, rank, unit, hometown. When they asked about her family, Keiko hesitated. Her father had died in the Philippines. Her mother remained in Osaka, likely dead from the firebombing. Her younger brother Taro was somewhere in the Pacific, fighting with what remained of the Imperial Navy. She answered truthfully, expecting punishment for her honesty. Instead, the American sergeant simply wrote her responses in a ledger. Then came the medical examination. Keiko had prepared herself for humiliation, for hands that would violate her under the guise of inspection. But the American doctor was a woman, middle-aged with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She examined Keiko gently, noting the infected cut on her left arm from the shipwreck. The doctor cleaned it with something that stung, then bandaged it with white gauze that smelled of antiseptic. "You'll be fine," the doctor said through the interpreter. "The infection is minor. We'll give you sulfa powder." Medicine. They were giving medicine to the enemy. As Keiko was led to the women's barracks, she passed rows of buildings identical to her own. Through the windows, she saw beds with mattresses, not bare wooden platforms. She saw electric lights hanging from the ceilings. She saw American guards standing relaxed, smoking cigarettes, talking among themselves like men without enemies nearby. The cognitive dissonance threatened to shatter her completely. Everything she had been taught since childhood, every speech from every officer, every newspaper article and radio broadcast, all of it insisted that Americans were barbaric monsters who would show no mercy. Yet here she stood, bandaged and unharmed, about to sleep in a real bed. August 15th, 1945. 5:30 in the morning. The sound that woke Keiko was not a scream or a gunshot, but the clang of a bell. She sat up on her mattress, disoriented. Pale dawn light filtered through windows covered with wire mesh, but not bars. The other women in the barrack were stirring, whispering to each other in confused Japanese. An American guard appeared at the door, a woman in her 30s wearing the uniform of the Women's Army Corps. She spoke through a portable loudspeaker in heavily accented Japanese. "Breakfast in 30 minutes. Wash stations are behind the building. You will have hot water." Hot water. Keiko had not bathed in hot water since leaving Japan 4 months ago. The wash station was a simple wooden structure with sinks and showers. True to the guard's word, hot water flowed from the faucets when Keiko turned the handles. She scrubbed her face and hands, watching the salt and grime from 17 days of captivity swirl down the drain. In the mirror above the sink, a stranger stared back at her. Hollow-eyed, thin, her uniform torn and stained with seawater. She was 26 years old, but looked 40. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today." Now, back to the story. The mess hall stood at the center of the compound, a large building that could seat perhaps 200 people. American soldiers ate at tables on one side of a painted line on the floor. Japanese prisoners sat on the other side. But they ate from the same kitchen, served by the same cooks. Keiko watched American soldiers receive their trays first, then watched as Japanese prisoners were given identical portions. She approached the serving line with her metal tray, expecting scraps. The American cook, a heavy-set man with a red face and sweat stains under his arms, scooped scrambled eggs onto her plate. Real eggs, not the powdered substitute she had eaten in the Japanese military. Then came 2 pieces of toast with butter. Then strips of bacon. Then a cup of coffee with real sugar and tinned milk. Keiko stood frozen, staring at more food than she had seen on a single plate in 6 months. The cook gestured for her to move along. She carried her tray to a table where 3 other Japanese women sat in similar states of shock. None of them spoke. They simply stared at the food as if it might vanish. "Eat," said a voice in Japanese. Keiko looked up to see the interpreter, a Japanese-American soldier wearing the uniform of the United States Army. He was perhaps 30 years old, his face carrying the features of their shared ancestry, but his bearing completely American. "The food is real. No one will take it from you." Keiko picked up her fork. The eggs were warm, fluffy, seasoned with pepper. The bacon was crispy, salty, rich with fat. The coffee was strong and sweet. She ate slowly, forcing herself not to cry. Across the room, American soldiers laughed and talked, their voices relaxed. Some glanced at the Japanese prisoners with curiosity, but not with hatred. After breakfast came a briefing. The Japanese prisoners were assembled in a recreation room with wooden chairs facing a makeshift stage. Sergeant Joe Matthews, a tall man with graying hair and a weathered face that suggested years of military service, stood before them. The interpreter translated his words, sentence by sentence. "You are prisoners of war under the protection of the Geneva Convention," Matthews said. His voice was firm but not harsh. "You will be treated with dignity and respect. You will receive adequate food, medical care, and shelter. You will be allowed to send letters home through the International Red Cross. You will work, but you will be paid. Any soldier who mistreats you will be punished according to military law." Keiko listened to these words and could not reconcile them with reality. In Japan, she had been taught that international law was a Western fiction, a set of rules that Americans would ignore the moment it became inconvenient. Yet here was an American sergeant explaining those very rules to Japanese prisoners as if they mattered. "I know what you've been told about us," Matthews continued, I know what your government said we would do to you. I'm here to tell you that your government lied. August 21st, 1945. Keiko had been at Camp McCoy for 7 days. 7 days during which the world she thought she understood continued to dissolve like ink in water. The routine of the camp was simple. Wake at dawn, wash, eat breakfast in the mess hall. Work assignments began at 8 in the morning. Keiko had been assigned to the camp laundry, where she and 5 other Japanese women washed uniforms and linens alongside American women from the Women's Army Corps. The work was hard, but not cruel. The American women spoke little Japanese, and Keiko spoke almost no English, but they communicated through gestures and occasional shared smiles. On this particular morning, Keiko felt ill. The August heat pressed down on Wisconsin like a wool blanket, and the laundry building was even hotter. Steam rose from the industrial washing machines in thick clouds. By mid-morning, Keiko's head pounded and her vision blurred. She tried to continue working, folding sheets with mechanical precision, but her hands trembled. "You okay?" one of the American women asked, her words incomprehensible, but her tone concerned. Keiko nodded and tried to smile. In Japan, showing weakness was shameful, but her body betrayed her. The room tilted sideways, and she gripped the folding table for support. The supervisor, a stern-looking sergeant, noticed immediately. She spoke to the interpreter, who turned to Keiko. "You need to see the doctor." "No," Keiko said quickly. "I can work." "That wasn't a question," the interpreter replied. 2 guards escorted Keiko to the camp infirmary. She walked between them on unsteady legs, feeling like a prisoner going to execution. But when they arrived at the medical building, the guards simply opened the door and gestured for her to enter. They did not follow. Inside, the infirmary smelled of antiseptic and clean cotton. The same female doctor from her arrival examination looked up from her desk. "Heat exhaustion," the doctor said after a brief examination. "Common in this weather. You need rest and fluids." The doctor led Keiko to a cot in a quiet room and told her to lie down. Then she left, returning a few minutes later with a glass of cool water and 2 white pills. "Aspirin," she said through the interpreter, "for the headache." Keiko took the medicine and drank the water gratefully. The doctor pulled a curtain around the cot to give her privacy, then left her alone. Keiko lay in the dimness, listening to the sounds of the infirmary. Footsteps, quiet conversations, the rustle of papers, normal sounds from a normal place. She closed her eyes and felt tears leak from beneath her eyelids. She woke to the sound of the door opening. Through the gap in the curtain, she saw a tall figure enter the infirmary. A Black American soldier she had not seen before. He spoke quietly to the doctor, his voice a deep rumble too soft for Keiko to make out the words. The doctor replied, then pointed toward the back of the building where supplies were kept. The soldier moved through the infirmary with careful steps, as if afraid of disturbing the silence. He was young, perhaps 25, with the lean build of someone who had missed too many meals in his childhood. His uniform was neat but worn, and he carried himself with a kind of quiet dignity that reminded Keiko of her father. He collected something from the supply closet and turned to leave. As he passed Keiko's cot, he paused. Their eyes met through the gap in the curtain. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement of her presence, then continued walking. 10 minutes later, he returned. This time he carried a steaming cup on a small tray. He approached the curtain and cleared his throat softly. "Ma'am?" he said, his voice uncertain. Keiko sat up, confused. The soldier gestured with the cup. "Tea," he said. "Doctor said you need fluids. Thought hot tea might help more than water." He set the tray on the small table beside her cot, then stepped back quickly, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt. Keiko stared at the cup. Steam rose from it in delicate spirals. The smell was familiar. Real tea, not the bitter substitute they had drunk in the Japanese military. "I'm Samuel," the soldier said, then added something else she did not understand. He pointed to himself. Samuel Collins. August 21st, 1945. 4 hours after Samuel Collins brought her tea. Keiko sat in the recreation room, the cup cradled in her hands long after it had gone cold. She had drunk the tea slowly, savoring each sip while trying to understand what had just happened. An American soldier, a black American soldier she had been taught to fear as doubly inferior, had shown her more kindness than any officer in the Imperial Japanese Army. The recreation room was filling with prisoners returning from work assignments. Keiko watched them file in, tired but not broken. They spoke in small groups, their voices carrying fragments of conversation about the day's labor, the weather, the food. Normal complaints from normal people, not the desperate whispers of prisoners expecting execution. Then she saw him. Taro Fujita, her younger brother, standing in the doorway. For a moment, Keiko thought she was hallucinating from the heat exhaustion. But no, it was really him. Thinner than she remembered, his face hardened by war, but unmistakably Taro. He was scanning the room, searching. When his eyes found her, his expression transformed from desperate hope to overwhelming relief. He crossed the room in 4 long strides. Keiko stood, and they embraced fiercely, both trembling. She had not known if he was alive. The last letter from him had come 6 months ago, before she shipped out to Okinawa. She pressed her face against his shoulder and felt tears soak into his prison uniform. "I thought you were dead," Taro whispered in Japanese. "When I heard about Okinawa, I thought everyone died." "I thought the same about you," Keiko replied. "When did you arrive?" 3 days ago. They just finished processing my group. We've been in separate compounds." He pulled back to look at her face. "Are you injured? You look thin." "Heat exhaustion this morning. The doctor treated me." She hesitated, then added, "They're treating us well, Taro. Better than our own army did." His expression darkened. "Don't say that. Don't let them corrupt you with their tricks." "It's not tricks. I've been here 7 days. Real food, real medicine, hot water. They follow their own laws about prisoners." "It's propaganda," Taro insisted, his voice rising. "They want us weak and compliant. They want us to forget our duty to the Emperor." Other prisoners were looking at them now. Keiko lowered her voice. "I haven't forgotten anything, but I also haven't been beaten or starved, have you?" Taro's jaw clenched. "That's not the point. The point is they're the enemy. They destroyed our country. They killed our father." "The war killed father. The war we started." The words hung between them like a physical object. Taro stared at his sister as if she had struck him. "What's happened to you?" he asked quietly. "What have they done to you in 7 days?" Before Keiko could answer, a voice spoke in careful Japanese. "Excuse me, ma'am. Are you feeling better?" They both turned. Samuel Collins stood a few feet away, holding his cap in both hands. His expression was cautious, almost apologetic for interrupting. Keiko noticed how he positioned himself, leaving space for them to refuse his presence, ready to leave if unwelcome. "Yes," Keiko said in English, the word awkward on her tongue. "Thank you. The tea helped." Samuel's face broke into a small smile. "Good. I'm glad." He nodded politely to Taro, who stared at him with barely concealed hostility. Then Samuel turned to leave. "Wait," Keiko said. The word came out sharper than she intended. Samuel paused, looking back at her with raised eyebrows. Keiko's mind raced. She wanted to thank him properly, but her English was limited to perhaps 20 words. She wanted to explain to Taro that not all Americans were monsters, that this soldier had shown her simple human kindness. She wanted to bridge the gap between the world she had been taught to believe in and the world that actually existed. What came out of her mouth shocked her as much as it shocked the two men staring at her. "I want a child with you." The recreation room went silent. Every prisoner, every guard, every person within earshot turned to stare. Keiko felt her face burn with embarrassment, but she could not take the words back. They hung in the air like smoke. Samuel's eyes went wide. His mouth opened and closed twice without producing sound. Taro grabbed Keiko's arm, his grip painful. "What did you just say?" he hissed in Japanese. But Keiko kept her eyes on Samuel. She did not know how to explain what she meant. She did not know how to tell him that his simple act of kindness had shattered something fundamental in her understanding of the world. That in bringing her tea, he had become human to her. That if humans could be kind across enemy lines, across racial divides, across every boundary that separated them, then perhaps the future did not have to be defined by the past. That perhaps children born from such kindness could inherit a better world than the one their parents had destroyed. She knew only that the words were true, even if she could not articulate why. August 21st, 1945. 30 minutes after the words that changed everything. Taro dragged Keiko outside the recreation room and into the space between the barracks where prisoners could walk during free time. The August sun was setting, painting the Wisconsin sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Keiko painfully of home. Taro released her arm but stood close, his face tight with anger and something deeper. Fear, perhaps, or grief. "Have you lost your mind?" he demanded in rapid Japanese. "Do you understand what you just said? To a black American soldier? In front of everyone?" "I understand," Keiko replied, though she was not certain she did. The words had come from somewhere deep and instinctive, from a place that had been building in her for 7 days of cognitive dissonance. "I meant what I said. You meant that you want to bear the child of our enemy, of a man whose people bomb our cities, whose armies kill our soldiers, whose country has destroyed everything we knew." "I meant that I want to believe in a future," Keiko said quietly. "A future where kindness matters more than propaganda, where human beings can see each other as human beings." Taro stared at his sister, as if she were a stranger. "They've broken you. In 7 days, they've broken you completely." "No one has broken me. I've just had my eyes opened." "To what? American lies?" "To American truth." Keiko met her brother's gaze steadily. "Taro, everything we were told about them was wrong. They're not monsters. They're not demons. They're people. Some good, some bad, most just trying to survive like us." "They're the enemy," Taro insisted. "That black soldier, he probably volunteered to guard prisoners. He probably enjoys having power over Japanese people. He brought me tea when I was sick. He didn't have to. No one ordered him to. He saw another person suffering and he helped, that's all." Taro's hands clenched into fists. "You sound like a traitor." The word hit Keiko like a physical blow. In wartime Japan, being called a traitor meant death. Even here, in this American camp, the accusation carried weight. She could see in her brother's eyes that he meant it. "I'm not a traitor to Japan," Keiko said carefully. "But I'm also not going to be loyal to lies. Our government told us Americans would torture us. They don't. They told us we would be starved. We're not. They told us we would be treated worse than animals. We're being treated according to international law. Every single thing they told us was a lie, Taro. Every single thing." "So what?" Taro's voice cracked. "So what if they feed us and give us medicine? That doesn't change what they've done to our country. Tokyo is burning. Hiroshima is gone. Nagasaki is gone. Millions of our people are dead. And you want to have this soldier's child? Keiko flinched. News of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had reached the camp 3 days ago. The atomic bombs had killed perhaps 200,000 people in an instant. The numbers were so large they became meaningless. Keiko's mind could not grasp the scale of such destruction. I don't know what I want, she admitted. I only know that hate hasn't saved us. Pride hasn't saved us. Loyalty to the Emperor hasn't saved us. Maybe it's time to try something else. Surrender, Taro said bitterly. That's what you mean. Complete surrender of everything we are. Maybe what we are needs to change. They stood in silence for a long moment. Around them, other prisoners moved through the compound in small groups. Guards patrolled the perimeter with rifles slung over their shoulders, looking bored rather than threatening. In the distance, someone was playing a harmonica, the melody drifting across the evening air. It was a Japanese folk song, something Keiko had learned as a child. Hearing it here, in an American prison camp, performed by a prisoner who had somehow kept his instrument through battle and capture, felt like a small act of resistance, or perhaps a small act of hope. Keiko was no longer certain which. I saw him looking at you, Taro said finally, his voice quieter now. That soldier, Samuel, the way he looked when you said those words. He's a good man, isn't he? Keiko nodded. I think so, from what little I know of him. And that's what scares me, Taro said. Because if he's good, if any of them are good, then what were we fighting for? If they're not monsters, if they're just people, then all those deaths, Father's death, all of it was for nothing. Just two groups of people killing each other over lies and pride. Maybe it was, Keiko said softly. And maybe admitting that is the first step toward something better. Taro looked at his sister with an expression that mixed love and loss. I can't follow you there. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I'm still angry, Keiko. I'm angry at them for winning, angry at our leaders for losing, angry at the whole world for being this way. I know, Keiko said. I'm angry too, but I'm also tired. Tired of being told who to hate. Tired of being afraid. That soldier brought me tea, and for the first time in years, I felt like a human being instead of a soldier or a prisoner or an enemy. I felt seen. And I want more of that, even if it means letting go of everything I thought I knew. From inside the recreation room, the dinner bell rang. Prisoners began moving towards the mess hall in orderly lines. Taro and Keiko stood together between the barracks, both changed by the conversation, but in different ways. Taro's anger had not diminished, but something in his certainty had cracked. Keiko's confusion had not cleared, but something in her fear had eased. They walked to dinner together without speaking further. In the mess hall, Keiko saw Samuel Collins sitting with other soldiers at a far table. He glanced up once, met her eyes briefly, then looked away quickly, his expression unreadable. Keiko collected her tray of food and sat with the other Japanese women, feeling the weight of their curious and judgmental stares. She had spoken words that could not be unspoken. She had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, and somewhere in the chaos of her transformation, she realized she did not want to go back. August 22nd, 1945, the morning after everything changed. Samuel Collins stood outside the mess hall at 6:15, smoking a cigarette he did not want, and trying to convince himself he had not made a terrible mistake. Bringing tea to a sick prisoner was one thing. Having that prisoner declare in broken English that she wanted to bear his child was something else entirely. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face in that moment, desperate and sincere and completely bewildering. Corporal Richard Thompson found him there, leaning against the wooden wall and looking miserable. Rich was 23, blonde, perpetually cheerful, and constitutionally incapable of letting his friends suffer in silence. He had also been in the recreation room when Keiko spoke those words. Everyone in camp had heard about it by now. "You gonna hide out here all day?" Rich asked, lighting his own cigarette. "I'm not hiding," Samuel said. "Sure you're not. That's why you're standing behind the mess hall instead of eating breakfast inside like a normal person." Samuel took a long drag and said nothing. Rich waited, because that was what good friends did. They waited until you were ready to talk. Finally, Samuel spoke. "I don't know what she meant. I don't know if it was the fever talking, or if she was trying to say something else and the English came out wrong, or if she actually meant it." "Does it matter?" Rich asked. "Of course it matters. Why? She's a prisoner. You're a guard. Nothing's going to happen either way." Samuel turned to look at his friend. "You know that's not the point. The point is, she said it in front of everyone. Now everyone's looking at me, at her, wondering what's going on between us. And there's nothing going on. I brought her tea because she was sick, that's all." "But you wish there was something going on," Rich said quietly. "Don't you?" Samuel did not answer. He could not answer, because the truth was complicated and dangerous. The truth was that he had noticed Keiko from the first day she arrived. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because she was exotic or foreign or any of the degrading reasons white soldiers noticed Asian women, but because of something in her eyes. A sharp intelligence that reminded him of his mother. A dignity that prison uniforms and defeat could not erase. He had brought her tea because she was sick, and he was kind. But he had thought about her afterward. And that thinking felt like betrayal to something he could not quite name. "Sergeant Matthews wants to see you," Rich said, changing the subject with the grace of someone who understood when to push and when to let things rest. 9 o'clock in his office. "About what?" "About a Japanese woman telling you she wants your baby in front of half the camp. What do, you think?" Samuel ground out his cigarette under his heel and headed toward the barracks to change into a fresh uniform. At 8:55, he presented himself at Sergeant Matthews' office. The sergeant was sitting behind his desk, reading a report and looking like a man who had dealt with stranger situations than this, but would prefer not to add another to his list. "Close the door, Collins," Matthews said without looking up. Samuel obeyed and stood at attention. Matthews finished reading, set the report aside, and studied Samuel with the expression of a disappointed father rather than an angry superior officer. "Tell me what happened yesterday." "The prisoner was sick, sir. Heat exhaustion. I brought her tea from the infirmary kitchen." "And she responded by announcing she wanted to have your child." "Yes, sir." "Do you know why she said that?" "No, sir. I don't speak Japanese. She doesn't speak much English." Matthews leaned back in his chair. "I've been thinking about this all night, Collins, trying to figure out what to do. On one hand, you did nothing wrong. You showed compassion to a sick prisoner, which is exactly what we're supposed to do. On the other hand, we now have a situation that could become complicated very quickly." "I understand, sir." "Do you? Because I'm not sure I do." Matthews sighed. "Here's what I think happened. That woman has had her entire worldview shattered in the past week. Everything she was taught about Americans turned out to be false. She's looking for something to believe in, and you became it when you showed her basic human decency. That's a lot of responsibility, son." "I didn't ask for it, sir." "No, you didn't, but you've got it anyway." Matthews stood and walked to the window overlooking the compound. "I could transfer you to another post, make this someone else's problem, but that wouldn't be fair to you, and it wouldn't be fair to her." Samuel waited. Matthews turned back to face him. "You're a good soldier, Collins. You treat these prisoners with respect. You follow the rules. You don't abuse your authority. Those are rare qualities, especially for someone who faces the kind of prejudice you face every day in this man's army. Thank you, sir. I'm not finished. What I'm about to say stays between us. Understood? Yes, sir. Matthews chose his next words carefully. If you continue to show kindness to that prisoner, people will talk. Some will assume things that aren't true. Some will say things that are cruel and racist. You need to be prepared for that, and you need to decide if it's worth it. Samuel met his sergeant's eyes. Is it wrong, sir, to treat her like a human being? No, son, it's not wrong. It's the only thing that's right. August 27th, 1945. 5 days after the declaration. The rumors spread through Camp McCoy like smoke through dry grass. Some said the Japanese woman had propositioned the black soldier. Others claimed it was a love affair. A few insisted she was a spy using seduction to gather intelligence. The truth, which was both simpler and more complicated than any rumor, got lost in the noise. Keiko heard the whispers, even though she could not understand the English words. She saw it in the way other prisoners looked at her, some with curiosity, others with disgust. The women in her barracks had stopped talking when she entered the room. Even the guards treated her differently now. Not cruelly, but with a careful distance that felt like walking on ice that might crack at any moment. She continued her work in the laundry, folding sheets and uniforms with mechanical precision, while her mind wandered through everything that had changed. She had meant what she said to Samuel, though she still struggled to articulate exactly what she had meant. Not a physical proposition, though the English had made it sound that way. More like a prayer, a hope that kindness could create something better than hate, that two people from opposite sides of the world could recognize each other's humanity and build from that recognition. But wishes and reality were different things. Reality was the suspicious glances, the isolation, the growing certainty that she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. On the morning of August 27th, as Keiko carried a basket of clean towels across the compound, she saw Samuel walking toward the supply building. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement that said he had not forgotten her. Then he continued walking, and she continued carrying her basket, and both of them pretended that brief moment of recognition had not meant everything. That afternoon brought a change in routine. Sergeant Matthews announced that prisoners would be allowed to attend English language classes taught by Japanese American soldiers who served as translators. The classes would meet 3 times a week in the recreation building. Attendance was voluntary, but encouraged. Matthews explained through the translators that learning English would help prisoners communicate better, understand camp rules more clearly, and prepare for eventual repatriation. What he did not say, but what Keiko understood immediately, was that these classes offered a way for prisoners and guards to interact in a structured, supervised environment where human connection might be possible without scandal. The first class met that evening. 23 Japanese prisoners sat on one side of the recreation room. 3 American soldiers, including Samuel Collins and Rich Thompson, sat on the other side. The teacher was a Japanese-American sergeant named Robert Nakamura, who had been born in California and joined the army to prove his loyalty to America after his family was sent to an internment camp. Nakamura began with simple phrases. Good morning, good afternoon, thank you. Please. The prisoners repeated the words, their accents thick but earnest. The American soldiers listened, and when it was their turn, Nakamura taught them basic Japanese greetings. The Americans mangled the pronunciation so badly that several prisoners laughed, and for a moment the room felt less like a prison and more like a classroom where people were simply learning. After the formal lesson ended, Nakamura encouraged informal conversation. "Practice with each other," he said in both languages. "Don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's how you learn." Rich Thompson approached a group of male prisoners and attempted to introduce himself in Japanese. His pronunciation was terrible, but his smile was genuine. The prisoners responded with patient corrections. On the other side of the room, 2 American soldiers were teaching Japanese women how to say baseball and hot dog, which led to confusion and laughter when the women tried to understand why Americans would eat dogs. Samuel stood near the wall, watching but not participating. Keiko could feel his presence like heat from a fire. She wanted to approach him. She wanted to try again to explain what she had meant. But fear held her frozen in place. Fear of rejection, fear of misunderstanding, fear of making everything worse. Then Rich Thompson, bless his uncomplicated soul, solved the problem by walking over to Samuel and dragging him physically across the room. "Come on, Sam. You're here to practice, so practice." He deposited Samuel directly in front of Keiko and another Japanese woman named Yuki, then disappeared before either could protest. Samuel and Keiko stared at each other. Yuki, reading the situation with the accuracy of someone who had heard all the rumors, quietly excused herself to practice with someone else. They were alone in a room full of people. Samuel cleared his throat. "Good evening," he said carefully. Keiko had been practicing this phrase for days. "Good evening," she replied. "How are you?" She understood this one, too. "I am good, thank you. How are you?" "I'm well. Thank you for asking." They stood in awkward silence. Around them, other conversations flowed in broken English and broken Japanese, punctuated by laughter and friendly corrections. Finally, Samuel spoke again, slower this time. "I wanted to tell you, I'm not angry. About what you said, I was surprised, but not angry." Keiko caught perhaps half the words. She responded in Japanese, knowing he would not understand but needing to say it anyway. "I'm sorry I embarrassed you. I'm sorry I caused trouble. I just wanted you to know that your kindness changed something in me, that it gave me hope." Samuel did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. He understood the sincerity in her eyes. September 3rd, 1945. The English classes had been meeting for a week. Keiko's vocabulary expanded beyond simple greetings to include useful phrases like, "Please pass the salt," and "Where is the bathroom?" More importantly, the classes had created a space where prisoners and guards could interact as humans rather than enemies. Friendships were forming across the language barrier. The compound felt different, less like a prison and more like a temporary community waiting for the war to end. On this particular evening, the lesson focused on describing family. Nakamura wrote simple sentences on a chalkboard and had prisoners practice introducing their relatives. "I have one brother. I have 2 sisters. My father was a farmer. My mother is a teacher." The sentences were basic, but the emotions they stirred were not. Several prisoners wept while describing families they might never see again. When it was Keiko's turn, she stood and spoke carefully. "I have one brother. His name is Taro. He is here. My father is dead. My mother is dead. My home is gone." The room went quiet. Even those who did not understand English heard the grief in her voice. Samuel, sitting in the back row, felt something crack open in his chest. This woman who had lived through propaganda and war and loss had still found it in herself to hope for something better. That took a kind of courage he was only beginning to understand. After class ended, Nakamura approached Samuel. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" They stepped outside into the September evening. The air had turned cooler now, carrying the first hints of autumn. Nakamura lit a cigarette and offered one to Samuel, who accepted. They smoked in silence for a moment before Nakamura spoke. I heard about what happened between you and that prisoner, Keiko. Samuel tensed. Nothing happened between us. I know. That's not what I mean. Nakamura took a long drag. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it. That woman is going through something I went through 2 years ago. Having everything you believed in revealed as a lie. Realizing your own government betrayed you. It's like dying and being born again in the same moment. How do you know? Because I'm Japanese American, Sam. When they put my family in Manzanar, when they took our house and our business and our dignity, I had to choose. Believe America was the enemy like everyone said, or believe America was an idea worth fighting for despite the people who corrupted it. I chose to believe in the idea. I joined the army to prove my loyalty to something that didn't always show loyalty to me. Samuel understood exactly what Nakamura meant. He had made a similar choice every day of his life. To believe in American ideals even when American reality failed to live up to them. To serve a country that did not always serve him back. Keiko is making that same choice right now, Nakamura continued. She's choosing to believe that kindness matters, that humans can connect across impossible divides. And you, whether you meant to or not, you became the symbol of that possibility for her. I didn't ask to be anyone's symbol. None of us do. But here we are. Nakamura dropped his cigarette and ground it out. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying that kindness has consequences. Sometimes those consequences are beautiful. Sometimes they're complicated. Usually they're both. That night, Samuel lay in his bunk and thought about consequences. He thought about his mother in Mississippi, who had taught him that dignity was something you carried inside yourself, regardless of what others tried to take away. He thought about his father, dead from overwork and lack of medical care because black men in the South were considered expendable. He thought about every time he had been called a slur, treated as less than human, denied basic dignity because of the color of his skin. And he thought about Keiko, who had been taught that he was a demon, but chose to see him as a person instead. Who had looked at him with clear eyes and decided that propaganda was a lie. Who had risked everything to say out loud what she saw, that they were both human, that humanity mattered more than the categories society tried to force them into. September 10th, 1945. 2 weeks after the declaration that changed everything, the English classes had become the center of camp social life. Prisoners who attended made faster progress than those who stayed isolated. They smiled more. They engaged with guards. Some even joked in broken English about the war being over and everyone just wanting to go home. The transformation was small but real. Samuel and Keiko had fallen into a pattern. They practiced English together twice a week, always in the crowded recreation room where nothing inappropriate could happen. Their conversations remained simple. Talking about weather, about food, about small details of daily life that required no deep revelation. But underneath the simple words ran a current of understanding that neither could fully articulate. On this evening, the class ended early because of a supply delivery that needed unloading. Most prisoners returned to their barracks. Most soldiers headed to the mess hall for dinner. But Samuel and Keiko, along with a few others, lingered in the recreation room. Someone had found a radio that picked up music stations from Chicago. Frank Sinatra was singing about love and loss, his voice drifting through the Wisconsin evening. Rich Thompson was teaching 2 Japanese prisoners how to play checkers. Nakamura was helping another group write letters home through the Red Cross. The atmosphere felt almost peaceful, almost normal. Samuel sat near the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that reminded him of home. Keiko approached quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee from the kitchen. "Is okay?" she asked, offering him 1 cup. Samuel took it, surprised by the reversal. He had brought her tea. Now she brought him coffee. The symmetry felt important, though he could not explain why. "Thank you," he said. She sat in the chair next to him. Not too close, but not distant either. They drank their coffee in comfortable silence. Outside, guards changed shifts. Prisoners walked between buildings. Life continued its ordinary rhythm. Then Keiko spoke, her English slow but clearer than it had been 2 weeks ago. "Samuel, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Why you are kind to me. Other soldiers, they are kind too. But you are different. Why?" Samuel considered the question. He could give her an easy answer. Something about duty or following orders or basic human decency. But she deserved the truth, even if his vocabulary was not sophisticated enough to express it fully. "My whole life," he began carefully, "people have treated me different because of my skin. They see black before they see Samuel. They see danger or inferior or something to fear. They don't see me." Keiko listened with absolute attention. She understood perhaps 70% of his words, but she understood 100% of his meaning. "When I see you," Samuel continued, "I don't see enemy. I see a person who has been hurt by the same thing that hurts me. Hate, fear, people believing lies about other people because it's easier than seeing the truth." Keiko's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered, "this is what I feel too. In Japan, they teach me Americans are monsters. They teach me black people are animals. They teach me to hate. But hate is exhausting. Hate makes everyone smaller." Samuel reached out and took her hand. The gesture was simple and profound. Around them, the recreation room continued its evening rhythm. No one noticed or cared about two people holding hands while the radio played and the sun set. But in that moment, something fundamental shifted between them. They stopped being symbols or representatives of their races or nations. They became simply Samuel and Keiko, two humans who recognized each other's humanity in a world that worked very hard to prevent such recognition. "I need to tell you something," Samuel said quietly. "About me, about my life. So you understand why your words meant so much to me." Keiko squeezed his hand, giving permission. Samuel took a deep breath and began talking. He told her about growing up in Mississippi under Jim Crow, about separate water fountains and back entrances and signs that said, "Whites only." He told her about his father working himself to death in fields owned by white men who paid pennies for back-breaking labor. He told her about his mother cleaning houses for families who would not let her use their bathrooms. He told her about joining the army hoping to find dignity and finding segregation instead. September 14th, 1945. 4 days after Samuel and Keiko's conversation in the recreation room. Taro Fujita had been watching his sister with growing alarm. The way she looked at that black American soldier. The way she smiled during English classes. The way she had stopped defending Japanese honor and started talking about peace and reconciliation like those words meant anything in a world that had destroyed their country. He had tried reasoning with her. He had tried appealing to family loyalty. He had tried everything except accepting that Keiko had changed in a way he could not follow. And now, as he sat with 3 other Japanese prisoners in the far corner of the men's barracks, he was planning something desperate. "The fence on the east side," one of the men whispered in Japanese. "The wire is loose in 2 places. We noticed it last week during work detail." "Guards rotate every 4 hours, another added. "Between midnight and 4 in the morning, there are only 2 men covering that whole section." Taro listened to the escape plan with half his attention. The other half was thinking about Keiko, about disappointing her, about the look she would give him when she learned what he had done. But what choice did he have? To stay here and watch her fall in love with the enemy? To return to Japan as a defeated prisoner who had spent his captivity learning English and making friends with Americans? No. Better to try for freedom. Better to fail honorably than succeed in shame. When? Taro asked. Tonight. The new moon. Maximum darkness. At midnight, 4 Japanese prisoners moved through the compound like shadows. They had studied the guard patterns for weeks. They knew the blind spots. They reached the east fence without detection. The wire was indeed loose in 2 places. Working carefully and slowly, they began creating a gap large enough to crawl through. They did not know that Corporal Rich Thompson was sitting on the roof of the supply building on an unofficial smoke break. They did not know he could see their entire operation from his vantage point. Rich watched them work for perhaps 30 seconds, considering his options. Then he climbed down and walked quietly toward the guardhouse to alert the sergeant on duty. By the time the 4 prisoners had created a gap and were preparing to squeeze through, 6 American soldiers surrounded them. No shots were fired. No violence occurred. Sergeant Matthews arrived and spoke in a voice that carried across the night air. "Step away from the fence and put your hands on your heads." 3 of the prisoners complied immediately. Taro ran. He sprinted along the fence line toward the tree line beyond the compound, driven by panic and desperation, and the absolute certainty that he could not surrender. That to surrender now would be to lose everything that made him who he was. Rich Thompson, who had played football in high school and could still run faster than most men, gave chase. He caught Taro 50 yards from the fence and tackled him hard. They went down together in a tangle of limbs. Taro fought wildly, throwing elbows and trying to twist free. Rich held on, shouting for help. 2 more soldiers arrived and helped restrain the struggling prisoner. Then Taro made his fatal mistake. In the darkness and confusion, his hand found a rock the size of a fist. He swung it upward in pure instinct, aiming for Rich's head. The blow connected, with a sickening crack. Rich went limp. Taro scrambled free and ran again, now carrying the sick certainty that he had killed a man. He made it another 20 feet before a rifle shot split the night. The bullet caught him in the left shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. He lay in the grass, breathing hard, staring up at stars that looked exactly like the stars over Japan. Guards surrounded him within seconds, weapons pointed at his head. "Don't move!" someone shouted. "Don't you dare move!" Taro did not move. He had nowhere left to run. Behind him, Rich Thompson was sitting up groggily, touching the blood on his forehead and looking confused. He was alive. Thank God he was alive. But Taro's shoulder was bleeding heavily, and somewhere in the compound, someone was running to wake the doctor, and someone else was running to inform the prisoners what had happened. Keiko woke to hands, shaking her roughly. One of the women from her barracks was speaking rapidly in Japanese. "Your brother. He tried to escape. He's been shot." The world tilted sideways. Keiko threw on her clothes and ran toward the infirmary without permission, without thought, driven by terror and love and guilt. Guards tried to stop her. She pushed past them. She burst through the infirmary doors to find Taro on a table, the American doctor working to stop the bleeding from his shoulder. His face was gray with pain and shock. "Taro," she sobbed, rushing to his side. He looked at her with eyes that held accusation and grief in equal measure. "I did it for you," he whispered in Japanese, "to save you from yourself, to remind you who we are." "You fool!" Keiko cried. "You absolute fool! We're prisoners. We're defeated. We're lucky to be alive and treated well, and you threw it away for what? Pride? Honor? Those things are fantasies, Taro. They're the lies that got us here." "They're all we have left," he said. "No." Keiko gripped his uninjured hand. "We have life. We have the chance to learn, to change, to become better than what we were. But you tried to throw that away." The doctor finished his work and stepped back. "He'll live," he said through the interpreter who had arrived. The bullet went through clean, no permanent damage, but he'll be in isolation for a month and lose all privileges. Keiko translated for Taro, who closed his eyes. At least I tried, he whispered. At least I didn't surrender completely like you. Those words hit Keiko like fists. She stood there, torn between love for her brother and rage at his stubbornness, between loyalty to family and loyalty to the truth she had discovered. The war had ended. Japan had surrendered. But the battle inside every prisoner, the battle between who they had been and who they might become, that battle was just beginning. And Keiko was beginning to understand that some people would fight that battle until it destroyed them. Chapter 11. September 18th, 1945. 4 days after Taro's failed escape. Keiko sat beside her brother's bed in the isolation ward, watching him sleep. The bullet wound was healing cleanly, but something else had broken inside him. He barely spoke. When he did, it was only to repeat that he had failed. Failed to escape. Failed to uphold honor. Failed to be the man their father had raised him to be. Taro, Keiko said softly, Father would be proud that you survived. That's all that matters now. He turned his face away from her. The conversation was over before it began. Keiko left the isolation ward and walked across the compound toward the mess hall. It was nearly dinner time. The September air carried the smell of cooking food and the sound of men's voices, normal sounds from a normal evening. But nothing felt normal anymore. Samuel found her sitting alone on the steps outside the recreation building. He sat down beside her without asking permission. They had moved past the need for such formalities. "How's your brother?" he asked. "Broken," Keiko replied. "Not his body, his spirit." "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. He chose this. He chose pride over wisdom. He chose death over life." Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that changed everything. "My mother used to tell me that the bravest thing a person can do is choose life when death seems easier. Choose hope when despair seems reasonable. Choose love when hate seems justified." Keiko turned to look at him. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." She was. She died 2 years ago, but her words live in me. They sat together as the sun set. Around them, the compound prepared for evening. Guards changed shifts. Prisoners finished work details. The ordinary rhythm of camp life continued. But Keiko felt something shift inside her. A decision forming. A choice becoming clear. "Samuel," she said, "I want to help." "Help with what?" "Whatever you need. The prisoners need better winter clothing. I heard the supply request was denied. Let me write a letter to the Red Cross, in Japanese and English. They will listen." Samuel looked surprised. "You'd do that? Even after what happened to Taro?" "Especially after what happened to Taro. He chose to fight a war that's already over. I choose to build something that might last." Over the next 2 weeks, Keiko worked with Sergeant Matthews and the camp administration to improve conditions for all prisoners. She translated documents. She helped resolve disputes between Japanese prisoners and American guards. She became a bridge between two worlds that desperately needed connecting. And slowly, other prisoners began following her example. Not all of them. Taro never forgave her. But enough that the atmosphere in the camp transformed from hostile standoff to cautious cooperation. October 15th, 1945. The official announcement came through the camp loudspeakers. Repatriation would begin in November. All Japanese prisoners would be returned to their homeland. The news brought mixed emotions, relief at going home, fear of what home had become. Japan was destroyed, cities burned, millions dead. What future waited for defeated soldiers returning to a defeated nation? Keiko found Samuel that evening. They walked together along the fence line, talking about everything and nothing, about the future they both faced, about the lessons they had learned, about the connection they had formed across impossible boundaries. "I meant what I said," Keiko told him as they walked. "That first time, about wanting a child with you." Samuel stopped walking. "I know you did. Not the way it sounded, but the meaning behind it. I wanted to believe that kindness could create something new, that two people from different worlds could see each other as human and build from that. You showed me that was possible." "You showed me the same thing," Samuel replied. "You chose to see me when others chose to see a uniform or a skin color. That took courage I'm only beginning to understand." They stood together in the gathering darkness. They both knew they would likely never see each other again. Japan and Mississippi were worlds apart. But the connection they had forged, the transformation they had witnessed in each other, that would remain. "Promise me something," Keiko said. "Anything. Promise me you'll remember that kindness matters, even when the world tells you it doesn't, even when it's hard, even when you're tired of being brave." "I promise," Samuel said. "If you promise the same." "I promise." They said goodbye the way all meaningful goodbyes are said, with words that feel inadequate and silence that speaks volumes. Then Keiko walked back to the women's barracks. Samuel returned to his duties, and both of them carried forward the knowledge that they had changed each other in ways that could never be undone. Chapter 12. November 23rd, 1945. The ships that would carry Japanese prisoners back to their homeland waited in San Francisco Harbor. Keiko stood on the dock with 200 other prisoners, all of them staring at vessels that would take them home to a country they barely recognized. Behind them stood American soldiers who had guarded them, fed them, and in some cases become their friends. The war was over. The killing had stopped. But the work of healing had only just begun. Samuel was not there. He had been transferred to a different post 3 weeks earlier. They had said goodbye in the compound at Camp McCoy, knowing it was final. No addresses exchanged, no promises of letters, just the understanding that they had given each other something more valuable than contact information. They had given each other hope. As the ship pulled away from the dock, Keiko watched America shrink into the distance. She thought about everything she had learned in 3 months of captivity, about propaganda and truth, about hate and kindness, about the courage required to change your mind when everything you believed turns out to be wrong. She thought about Samuel Collins, a shy black soldier from Mississippi who had brought her tea and reminded her that humanity transcended all the boundaries people tried to build. The ship arrived in Yokohama on December 9th, 1945. What Keiko found there was worse than she had imagined. Tokyo was flattened. Osaka had burned. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were atomic wastelands. Millions were homeless and starving. The proud empire that had promised greatness had delivered only suffering. But amid the ruins, something new was growing. American occupation forces were distributing food. Rebuilding was beginning. And some Japanese, especially those who had been prisoners, were working to build bridges rather than walls. Keiko found work with the American Red Cross, translating and helping distribute aid. She shared her story carefully at first, then more openly. She talked about Camp McCoy, about American soldiers who had treated prisoners with dignity, about a black soldier named Samuel who had shown her that kindness was stronger than propaganda. Some people dismissed her stories as collaboration with the enemy. Others listened and began questioning their own assumptions. In 1952, 7 years after the war ended, Keiko gave a speech at a peace conference in Tokyo. She spoke about transformation through understanding. She told the story of a Japanese prisoner who had been taught to hate Americans and a black American soldier who had been taught to accept prejudice. She described how a simple act of kindness had shattered both their certainties. And she explained what she had really meant when she said those words that had confused everyone. "I wanted a child with him," she said to the assembled crowd. "Not literally, though I would have been honored. But metaphorically. I wanted to create something new from our connection, something that transcended hate and fear, a future built on recognition of shared humanity rather than division by nationality or race. That is the child I spoke of. That is the future we must all work to create." Meanwhile, in Mississippi, Samuel Collins returned home to a South that had not changed nearly enough. Jim Crow laws still separated black from white. Dignity was still denied to those who looked like him. But Samuel carried with him the knowledge that change was possible, that people could transform when shown the truth, that kindness was not weakness, but the hardest kind of strength. He became a teacher in a segregated school. He taught his students about respect and dignity. He told them about a Japanese prisoner who had chosen to see him as human when her entire nation told her not to. He explained that prejudice was taught and therefore could be untaught, that hate was learned and therefore could be unlearned. Some listened. Some carried his lessons forward, small changes that would accumulate into larger transformations. In 1968, 23 years after they said goodbye, Keiko published a memoir about her experiences. The book was translated into English and became required reading in American schools teaching about World War II. In the final chapter, she addressed a letter to Samuel, not knowing if he would ever read it. "Dear Samuel," she wrote, "I don't know where you are or if you're still alive, but I want you to know that the child I spoke of that day in the recreation room has been born, not from my body, but from the lessons we learned together. That child lives in every person who chooses understanding over hate, who chooses bridge building over wall building, who recognizes that our common humanity matters more than our differences. You gave me that gift. You saw me when you could have looked away. You chose kindness when hate would have been easier. And that choice changed everything. With gratitude and enduring respect, Keiko." Samuel read those words in a library in Jackson, Mississippi. He was 62 years old, retired from teaching, living alone in a house that had once seemed too empty, but now felt exactly right. He sat with the book in his hands and wept. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming knowledge that their brief connection had mattered. That the choice to show kindness had rippled forward through decades. That the child Keiko spoke of was real and growing and changing the world in ways neither of them could have predicted. The story of Samuel and Keiko became one small thread in the larger tapestry of reconciliation between former enemies. It proved that transformation was possible, that people raised on propaganda could choose truth, that kindness could demolish walls that armies could not breach. Their connection, forged across impossible divides in a prison camp in Wisconsin, became a symbol of what humanity could achieve when it chose hope over hate. They never saw each other again. But they never forgot each other either. And perhaps that was the real meaning behind Keiko's words. Not a literal child, but a legacy of transformation. A future built on the revolutionary act of seeing the enemy as human. A world where kindness mattered more than propaganda and hope was stronger than hate. That child still lives today, growing stronger with each person who chooses understanding over division. That was their gift to the future. That was the child they created together. I hope you like this story. Please share. What's your favorite part of the story? And where in the world you are watching from? Have a wonderful day.